Take-U held discussions with team leader Young Ji-hong of the COO office to establish an esports team. Thanks to this, the CEO's office became quieter and I found some relief. I skimmed through the news on a portal site. Of course, Ronald is not missing from today's news. At this point, it's not an exaggeration to say he's a regular guest. President Ronald has initiated the safeguard measures against South Korean electronics manufacturers, as previously mentioned. Originally, the focus was on Samsung Electronics and CL Electronics, but after Samsung SB announced plans to establish a battery factory, Samsung Electronics quietly slipped off the list. As a result, CL Electronics ended up bearing the brunt alone and hurriedly announced plans to set up a factory in the US, yet it was hard to avoid immediate damage. This was just the beginning. Ronald clearly stated that the next targets are automobiles and steel. He has also begun reviewing renegotiations of existing FTAs, which naturally includes South Korea. Another news item was the opening of the Two Sessions, China's largest political event. The Two Sessions refers to the National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, through which the Chinese government's operational policies and economic strategies are determined. Thus, during this period, global attention was focused on China. Here, President Xi Jinping criticized U.S. protectionism, asserting that the world must move towards free trade. Unbelievable. Who would have thought I'd witness a situation where the U.S. advocates for protectionism while China champions free trade? Wasn't it just a few years ago that the U.S. berated China for its protectionist policies? Nevertheless, the policies Ronald is pushing are beneficial for us. Since we already have a factory in the U.S., we are not affected by tariffs and trade barriers. On the contrary, other companies will face disadvantages in pricing competition due to the rising tariffs. When the appointed time came, I had a video call with Daryl. On the screen, Daryl looked at me and asked, "Which would you like to hear first, the good news or the bad news?" Let's start with the bad news. Our sales dropped by 8% compared to last month. Compared to the same period last year, the drop is over 20%. Inventory continues to increase, forcing us to partially halt production. We rejected proposals from dealers to raise sales incentives. As a result, several dealers terminated their contracts, and others showed a passive attitude toward sales. That doesn't mean we're putting a lot of effort into advertising or promotions, so it's no surprise that sales have plummeted. In any case, the decision to phase out the Chrysler brand has already been made. Though it hasn't been finalized, new models will be launched under a new brand starting with upcoming releases. I nodded. Now let's hear some good news. The Level 4 development has been completed. We have perfectly corrected various issues that arose during the simulated and test drives through machine learning. Autonomous driving is divided into several levels. Level 4 is advanced autonomous driving where driver control is not needed. Currently, the early stages of Level 4 have been developed by several automakers and incorporated into production vehicles. However, it is still not at a completely reliable level. Even among Level 4 systems, there can be a vast technological gap depending on whether it is perfected or not. This is because autonomous driving technology involves the lives of both drivers and pedestrians, allowing for no margin of error. Now, we might say we've entered Level 5. Level 5 represents complete autonomy. This is where unmanned vehicles can operate without any human presence. The difference from Level 4 lies in whether there is a person in the driver's seat and if remote control is possible. How is the collaboration with Samsung Electronics progressing? Thanks to their substantial preparations, the development is advancing faster than expected. They were planning to enter this market anyway, even without partnering with us. At this rate, we should be able to launch new models by the second half of this year. First, we plan to release a car equipped with Level 4 autonomous driving technology using an internal combustion engine, and then we will ramp up production of electric vehicles starting in the first half of next year. There might be battery supply issues until the TS company's factory is completed, but for now we plan to source batteries produced at Samsung SB's domestic factory. I nodded. It will be tough, but please hang in there a bit longer. Understood. Ending the video call, I let out a long-awaited sigh. It's a relief that things are progressing as planned. However, the rapidly increasing deficit is a major concern. We still have some leeway for now, but if we can't turn a profit within a year, we might face a liquidity crisis. Ronald needs to step up a bit. The meeting between Im Jin-young and Kang Jin-hoo at the baseball stadium was reported by several media outlets. Park Si-hyung, who was reading the newspaper at the Blue House residence, muttered to himself. Is he really a tiger cub after all? He had underestimated Im Jin-young. He thought that applying pressure would make him give up on Samsung SB and back down, but instead he used it as an opportunity to team up with Kang Jin-hoo. The battery plant that TS Company, a joint venture between Samsung SB and OTK Company, plans to build is the largest in the world. When this was announced, automobile manufacturers and battery companies all became tense. However, the bigger threat is the collaboration between Keros and Samsung Electronics. Im Jin-young probably planned to partner with Kang Jin-hoo from the beginning, regardless of Samsung SB. That's why things progressed so quickly. Before he was a politician, Park Si-hyung was a businessman. He spent much more time in the business world than in politics. During his time as a businessman, he realized that no matter how hard he tried, he could not escape being a servant to the chaebols. So he turned to politics, using the title of successful businessman to rise to the pinnacle of power as president. From a mere businessman, he had now reached a position where he could manipulate the chaebols. The taste of power was incredibly sweet. However, unfortunately, that time is not very long. Unless it's a dictatorship, a power holder must step down after their term ends. The presidential term is now nearing its end. Even if a new president emerges from the Korean Party, it would be impossible to enjoy the same power as now. Power is not eternal. But money is eternal. During the many regime changes, haven't chaebols passed down their wealth from generation to generation? Knowing this well, Park Si-hyung has amassed considerable wealth while in power. The fruit of that is PS. During Park Si-hyung's presidency, Unsung Motors, which received state support, grew significantly, and PS, supported by Unsung Motors, also grew alongside it. PS, which was merely a subcontractor, has grown into a large-scale parts company with 16 factories at home and abroad in just 10 years. The biggest problem for PAS is that it relies on Unsung Motors for 90% of its revenue. So far, Unsung Motors has been thriving with no significant issues. However, if a crisis arises for Unsung Motors, PS will also be affected. This is why OTK Company took action to support Ronald and directly entered the automotive industry through Keros. They immediately began their checks. Ultimately, Ronald was elected president, and since then the situation has continued to deteriorate. As feared, Ronald was considering adjusting automotive tariffs, even if it meant revising the Korea-US FTA. Despite support from the National Pension Service, Unsung's acquisition of Samsung SB ended in failure. In Park Si-hyung's view, Keros posed a greater threat than Tesla. The key factor is production volume. Even if Tesla's market capitalization grew to challenge GM, its annual production is only 70,000 vehicles. This level would not significantly affect the sales of other companies. However, Keros is different. Having already acquired Chrysler and secured production facilities, they are also building new factories. Once these factories are completed, production capacity could increase to 5 million vehicles per year. Due to battery supply issues, electric vehicle production is limited to around 500,000 units, but this still equates to 7 times the sales of Nikola. Once they start mass-producing vehicles equipped with fully developed autonomous driving technology, existing automakers with relatively inferior technology will be hit hard, including Unsung Motors. As long as the government doesn't relax autonomous driving regulations, the domestic market can be protected. However, U.S. regulatory issues depend on Ronald. If Keros were a Korean company or at least had operations in Korea, they could have influenced things in some way. But Keros is an American company, with its headquarters and factories located entirely in the U.S. Fortunately, the CEO of the holding company OTK is Korean. They attempted some moves initially, but the results were failures. Instead, a counterattack occurred, resulting in the loss of the National Intelligence Service head and the Attorney General, forcing the president to publicly apologize to the nation. Recalling that incident filled him with rage. Even Im Il-kwon and Han Min-gu bowed their heads before him, yet he, a mere 20-something, made him endured such humiliation. If Kang Jin-woo has a grudge against Unsung Motors, then from the start compromise would be impossible. Reaching out again would be risky, especially with the American president backing his opponent. Any clumsy actions could lead to even bigger problems. Yet he had no intention of sitting back and doing nothing. He still holds the power in his hands. Park Sang-yeep, having finished his work, met his friend after a long time. "Mr. Park, how have you been?" "It's been a while, Min-sik." Chai Min-sik, a fellow math major from Korea University, had passed the 5th grade civil service exam and was currently working as a bureaucrat in the Ministry of Economy and Finance. After being busy and out of touch for some time, they recently reconnected. "What do you want to eat?" "I've already made a reservation at a restaurant." The place Min-sik reserved was a high-end Japanese restaurant. They were guided to a quiet room. As Park Sang-yeep looked at the menu, he asked, "Are you paying?" Min-sik pretended to lament. "Come on, how much does a civil servant's salary even pay? Give me a break. If civil servants eat at places like this, isn't that against the Kim Young-ran Act? All you have to do is keep your mouth shut since you're the one paying." Park Sang-yeep chuckled. "Haha, all right." Before the food arrived, the drinks were served first. They filled each other's soju glasses to the brim. "How's work?" "Being a civil servant is pretty predictable. But being in the Ministry of Economy and Finance isn't that bad, right? You get to have a strong voice since you handle the budget." Min-sik shook his head. "Sure, the higher-ups might, but for someone like me at the bottom it's just a lot of hard work." "You're being too modest. 5th grade isn't bottom. I heard even students from Korea University are preparing for the 9th grade civil service exam these days." "That's true. There are a few among our classmates who haven't found a job yet." "You're amazing for passing that difficult public recruitment exam on your first try." "What are you talking about? Among our peers you're the most successful." "Really?" Park Sang-yeep didn't deny it. The two continued their discussion over sashimi and soju, talking about work, women, old school friends, and memories. "I remember back in the day when you were planning to invest by taking the deposit from your rented place to buy MK Tech or whatever. We all thought, what kind of crazy person does that?" Not just me, but our peers and seniors felt the same way. Then later, when it skyrocketed tenfold, it made me think you were someone destined for success. I didn't expect this level of success, though. Success? There's still a long way to go. Since it was their first meeting in a while, they had plenty to catch up on, and the conversation seemed endless. In the end, all their dialogues led to one conclusion. Still, school days were the most fun. Right. Now that I've experienced work, I realize those times playing pool after class were the happiest. It's true that everything seems better in hindsight. As they kept drinking, Chai Min-sik seemed to be wrestling with something he wanted to say, his lips twitching. Finally, unable to hold it in, Park Sang-yeep spoke up first. "Are you asking to borrow money?" "Huh. How much do you need?" Chai Min-sik looked flustered and waved his hands. "Oh no. It's not that." "Then what is it?" After a moment of hesitation, Chai Min-sik cautiously spoke up. "I have someone I'd like to introduce you to." "Who is it?" "Wait a moment." Chai Min-sik sent a text to someone. A moment later, a middle-aged man in a suit entered through the sliding door. Park Sang-yeep paused when he saw the man's face. For some reason he felt that it looked familiar. "Where have I seen him before?" The man greeted him politely. "Hello, Representative Park Sang-yeep. I am Bae Ji-han, the Chief Secretary for the Presidential Office." As the Chief Secretary, Bae Ji-han oversees appointments and operations at the Presidential Office. In other words, he can be seen as a close confidant of the president. Why did such a person suddenly appear in this place? Bae Ji-han smiled and spoke. "I apologize for not informing you earlier. I've heard quite a bit about you, Park Sang-yeep of K Company. I felt strongly that I wanted to meet you, so I asked Officer Chai for his assistance." When Park Sang-yeep turned to glance at his friend, Chai Min-sik offered an awkward smile. Did he suggest this meeting for this purpose? The Blue House had secretly conducted an investigation into all Korean university students working within government departments. They found out that Chai Min-sik, an officer at the Ministry of Finance, was a classmate of Park Sang-yeep and fairly close to him. Unaware of the circumstances, Chai Min-sik was called to the Minister of Finance's office, where he first met Bae Ji-han. As a mere officer, he could not refuse a request from the Blue House, so he immediately arranged the meeting. Sensing the unusual situation, Park Sang-yeep considered leaving but changed his mind. "Let me hear what he has to say." "Please have a seat." Bae Ji-han sat next to Chai Min-sik. You must be busy with national affairs. What brought you here? No matter how busy I am, I should drop everything to attend an occasion like this. Seeing that the atmosphere wasn't particularly bad, Chai Min-sik looked relieved. Bei Jihan cheerfully added, I've come a long way and am rather thirsty. Could I have a drink as well? Park Sang-yeep filled his glass generously. From appearance, Bei Jihan seemed amiable with a friendly personality, but that was merely surface level. Having kept an eye on the political realm, he knew Bei Jihan's true nature well. Bei Jihan leveraged his connection to the president to intervene in appointments at the Blue House and engaged in various abuses of power. Even the ruling party leaders had to watch their step around him. After a few drinks, Bei Jihan's face quickly turned red. Indeed, as someone in big business, you drink quite heartily. I can't compare to you. Haha. Bei Jihan suddenly seemed to have a thought and spoke to Chai Min-sik. Could you tell the driver outside that it might take a while so he can eat first? Asking him to relay that message instead of just calling suggests he wants Chai to step out for a moment. Understood. Please take your time in the conversation. Chai Min-sik immediately caught on and got up from his seat. Once he left, Park Sang-yeep loosened his tie comfortably. Was it sent by the president? To the direct question, Bei Jihan didn't deny it and calmly nodded. That's correct. The president has significant interest in you, Representative Park Sang-yeep. Why is that? It doesn't matter who runs a small corner store. If it goes bankrupt, nothing major happens. However, if a company like OTK Company encounters issues, it's a national concern. Such businesses should be managed by capable individuals, not inexperienced ones. For example, someone like you, Representative Park Sang-yeep. The two clinked their glasses. I'd like to hear the specifics. There are always various problems in business. Tax evasion, corruption, embezzlement, etc. And if there are none? Then we can create some, can't we? Are they suggesting to fabricate charges despite being innocent? Even if that's the case, it would be difficult for me to become the representative of OTK Company. There's also Vice President Oh Taek-yu and Senior Oh Hyun-ju. At the very least, I can help you fully acquire K Company. As he listened, he began to understand why he was chosen. The core of OTK Company, aside from Kong Jin-hoo, consists of Oh Taek-yu, Oh Hyun-ju and himself. Among them, I must be the easiest to manipulate. Are you telling me to betray? Bei Jihan spoke in a subtle tone while observing Park Sang-yeep's expression. What do you mean by betrayal? Since you're a man, don't you have that level of ambition? It seems you're mistaken. Pardon? He wasn't under Kong Jin-hoo because of a lack of ambition. On the contrary, he was overflowing with it. Do you know the current value of OTK Company? About 50 trillion won, I would guess. You're well informed. It all started with the 13 billion won from selling Bitcoin. In just a few years, that mere 13 billion had turned into 50 trillion. What would this 50 trillion be worth in a few years? In his view, it wasn't impossible for OTK Company to surpass NFTs and Google to become the world's #1 by market cap. Isn't this all possible thanks to people like you, CO Park, supporting from the sidelines? The L6 explosion, venture capital, Brexit, Ronald's election and more. It would be hard to believe that a single young man in his 20s accomplished all those monumental tasks alone. Naturally, one would assume there were others' contributions. Park Sang-yeep took a sip of his drink and said, You know there's been a lot of noise recently about cryptocurrencies? Oh. You're referring to virtual currencies like Bitcoin. Yes, exactly. Bei Jihan nodded. I know. It's been in the news a lot. At the beginning of the year, Bitcoin was hovering around the $1,000 mark. In just 1 or 2 months, it suddenly soared to more than double that. While Bitcoin's surge was impressive, new coins, commonly known as altcoins, would skyrocket overnight, making the situation even more daunting. The representative is none other than Ethereum. The sudden surge in cryptocurrency prices has been reported in the news daily, prompting people to open accounts on exchanges and dive into investments. Though largely unknown to the outside world after Brexit, K Company invested $1 billion in cryptocurrencies. They increased their stake in the exchange to 85% and bought new cryptocurrencies, including Ethereum. They also rented sites in China and Iceland to set up mining facilities and mine coins. Currently, the value of the coins held by K Company exceeds $2 billion. All of this happened due to Kong Jin-hoo's directive. Park Sang-yeep had been keeping an eye on the cryptocurrency market for a while, but he never imagined making such a large-scale investment. Without Kang Jin-hoo's orders, he probably would have limited himself to a few $1,000,000 at most. This is the difference between classes. Park Sang-yeep didn't start investing after receiving structured education in economics and investment. He happened to come across stocks and became utterly fascinated. He applied his mathematical analysis methods to investing, achieving major successes multiple times. At that point he was quite confident, believing that with just capital he could multiply his investments. However, that arrogance led to significant failure. Initially he couldn't understand why he failed. Now, however, he has a vague understanding. At first glance, the market seems to operate on rational logic. But beneath it lies madness and fear. When things are stable, there are no issues. However, the moment there's a slight tremor, madness and fear can surge through any opening. How many can truly see the truth within that chaos? Insight and judgment can be cultivated through effort, but inspiration and intuition are innate. Park Sang-yeep knew well that he lacked those traits. But Kang Jin-hoo was different. With an eye for opportunity, the ability to predict the future, and the guts to put everything on the line. That was not the realm of reason or thought, but truly the realm of intuition and art. And only Kang Jin-hoo resided within that domain. Even Oh Hyun-ju and Park Sang-yeep, who are considered geniuses, are merely following his instructions. They will never truly understand what kind of being Kang Jin-hoo is. So, I guess that's why they're babbling such nonsense here. Realizing that there was no need to listen any longer, Park Sang-yeep smiled and said, "Could you fill my glass, please?" "Haha, of course." Bae Ji-han filled the glass to the brim. Then Park Sang-yeep lifted the glass and splashed it onto the other person's face. Fush. Bae Ji-han, suddenly drenched in alcohol, was taken aback. "What the?" Park Sang-yeep chuckled and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. My hand slipped by mistake." He took out his wallet from his pocket, placed 4 50,000 won bills on the table and stood up. "I've got something to do, so I'll be leaving now. I'll pay for what I consumed. Use the rest for laundry expenses." As he stepped outside the restaurant, Chai Min-sik was smoking a cigarette with the driver. He turned to Park Sang-yeep and asked, "Why are you leaving already? Did you finish your conversation?" "No." I threw the drink at him for talking nonsense and left. "What?" "I'm going." Chai Min-sik quickly chased after him and grabbed his shoulder. "Are you crazy? Go back and apologize. Let go of me." "Huh?" Park Sang-yeep turned his head and said in a low voice, "Are you deaf? Take your hand away, you jerk." Feeling fear, Chai Min-sik quickly withdrew his hand and stepped back. "Hey, why are you acting like this with a friend?" Park Sang-yeep laughed in disbelief. "Friend? Someone like you isn't even a friend, you piece of trash. Don't contact me again." Having said what he needed, he started to walk away when he heard Chai Min-sik shout from behind, "Hey! Park Sang-yeep, you're making a mistake." Without looking back, Park Sang-yeep raised his middle finger. I take you, Hyun-ju, Ellie, and Henry gathered together to listen to Sang-yeep's story. When we heard that the chief secretary of the Blue House had appeared and tried to coax him while he was out drinking with friends, everyone's expression turned serious. "That sounds like a good offer. Why did you turn it down?" At my question, Sang-yeep shook his head. "If you believe everything a politician says, you're a fool. No matter how good the golden egg is, would you really split open the belly of the goose that lays it? Do I look like a goose that lays golden eggs? More than that, maybe an ostrich." Sang-yeep's joke eased the tension a bit. "Take, you spoke up. I knew they'd try something, but this is too blatant." "Right. It was entirely predictable that if the attempt failed, the fact of the coercion would come to light." Hyun-ju took a drag from her cigarette. "It means they don't care if it gets out. The frightening thing about this method is that it works even if it fails. Once you know the truth, it's hard not to worry. If Sang-yeep was approached, it means that others could be as well. But there's no straightforward way to respond. There's no way to monitor whether employees are in contact with government officials or not. Is there anyone in this world without weaknesses or greed? Someone will inevitably fall for the coercion. For now, we should assume that all basic information is flowing over to them," I said. "Like when I arrive at work, when I leave, who I meet, and so on. By the way, the things that guy in the presidency does are downright trashy." Park Si-hyung pretended to be bold, But he actually had a petty personality that remembered even the smallest details. After the primary election, all the dissenters within the party were purged, and those lawmakers who supported the opposing candidate were either denied nominations or strategically placed in difficult constituencies to ensure their defeat. Park Si-hyung, elected with a high approval rate, had ruled as an imperial president. No one dared to raise their head in front of him. However, following our counterattack, he found himself in the worst political crisis since taking office. Ultimately, he had to sacrifice 2 close aides and even apologize to the public for the first time. This was probably the greatest humiliation he had faced since becoming president. Naturally, he wouldn't forget that grudge. The problem lies in the substantial power wielded by the president. Although his approval ratings plummeted and he faced a crisis at that time, it was now all in the past. The Korean Gada Party still held the position of the leading party, and President Park Si-hyung's approval ratings remained over 50%. The opposition parties, which should be holding the government and ruling party in check, were engaged in internal strife. Ellie said, "Things have been quiet since then. Why are they moving again?" "It seems the acquisition of Seosung SB has stirred things up again," I replied. "They must have decided they couldn't stay idle any longer." "What should we do?" I asked. Hyunju, exhaling cigarette smoke, suggested, "Reaching out first for reconciliation might be an option." "How so?" I inquired. "Give some work to PS. Since PS produces plastic interior materials and airbags, it could easily receive subcontract work from Keros." "Will they accept such an offer?" Taekyu asked reproachfully. "What do you think of the president? If it makes money, he'd even forgive his parents' enemies." Somehow that actually seemed likely. But thinking about what happened makes me reluctant. With illegal surveillance, search and seizure, and even a prosecution investigation, it feels too unfair to kneel down. "How about we dig into PS?" Senior Sang Yip asked. "Are you suggesting we uncover the ownership structure? You know that Park Si-hyung doesn't own a single share in his name." The relationship between Park Si-hyung and PS had been problematic since the Korean Party primary, leading to several investigations. However, it was brushed off because he claimed not to hold any shares. Putting that aside, let's analyze the products, mergers and acquisitions and transaction processes closely. Didn't they say that in business there are always various issues? Sometimes an attack is the best defense. Fortunately, I have connections in American politics. They won't be able to pull off anything ridiculous like before. The rest will respond as the situation evolves. Suseodong, Unsung Motors headquarters. A meeting of the executive board was convened under the chairmanship of Vice Chairman Han Chan-young. Presidents of various subsidiaries, corporate heads, key department executives and development teams from the research institute gathered in one place. The expressions of those seated were all somber. This was due to Unsung Motors' current unfavorable situation. Last year, not only in the US but also in the global market, sales volumes began to decline for the first time. Fortunately, strong domestic performance meant that revenue and operating profit did not drop. However, the halt in growth was critical for the company. The problem is that the drop in sales is likely not just temporary but could become a trend. Han Chan-young stood up and spoke. "As you know, the end of internal combustion vehicles is now only a matter of time. European countries have already begun to cut sales of internal combustion vehicles since 2020, with plans to completely ban the sale of gasoline and diesel cars as early as 2030. Change was an anticipated trend. For this reason, most car manufacturers had been investing the profits from internal combustion vehicles into the development of future vehicles for a long time. Unsung Motors was no exception. Unfortunately, they missed a crucial opportunity at the most important time. Those gathered for the meeting were likely thinking the same thing. If it hadn't been for hydrogen cars. Initially, the development direction for next-generation vehicles was split between 2 paths: electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. At the beginning, electric vehicles seemed to have many issues. While performance could improve over time, the short driving range and long charging times appeared to be insurmountable problems. The cost of batteries was also an issue. Prices had not reached a level that could replace internal combustion vehicles due to battery costs. Hydrogen vehicles faced similar high costs, but it was believed that these could be adequately overcome through technological development and mass production. Hydrogen vehicles do not have range issues. And since refueling involves simply injecting hydrogen into storage tanks, the charging speed is not significantly different from that of internal combustion vehicles. Unsung Motors was convinced that hydrogen vehicles were the ultimate future vehicle. Therefore, they generously invested their group capabilities into hydrogen vehicle research and development ahead of others. As a result, they launched the world's first mass-produced hydrogen vehicle, the S25. The price was 150 million won, 5 times that of a comparable internal combustion vehicle. At this point, no matter how much subsidies are provided, price competitiveness is lacking. Moreover, there is an absurd shortage of hydrogen charging stations. Ultimately, S25 was only purchased for trial use by public institutions and research labs. The sales volume became negligible to the point where counting them was meaningless. Not only did they fail to generate profits, but they also struggled to recover even the invested development costs. However, this marked the beginning for hydrogen vehicles. From here on, all companies would enter the hydrogen vehicle market, and as the number of hydrogen vehicles increased, the shortage of charging stations would naturally be resolved. Toyota released the Mirai with the support of the Japanese government, and Honda, Audi, and BMW also began developing their own models. Up to this point, the future of hydrogen vehicles appeared bright, and Unsung Motors was convinced it would become a leader in the next-generation automotive industry. But an unexpected situation arose. Electric vehicles, which could be considered competitors, rapidly advanced and improved various issues. Their range increased, charging speed improved, and performance became comparable to internal combustion engine vehicles. The most decisive factor was the drop in battery prices. In recent years, the price of battery packs for electric vehicles has decreased by over 70%. This allowed electric vehicles to gain price competitiveness. Unlike hydrogen vehicles, which had zero private demand, electric vehicles sold like hotcakes. At the forefront was Tesla. As electric vehicles won decisively, companies that had been researching hydrogen vehicles quickly pivoted toward electric vehicles. Now, Unsung Motors was essentially left standing alone in the hydrogen vehicle camp. Realizing the severity of the situation, Unsung Motors belatedly began research and development on electric vehicles. However, it was already significantly lagging behind frontrunners like Tesla and BYD in terms of technology. Fortunately, Unsung Motors had the technical expertise, production capacity, and sufficient capital accumulated as a complete vehicle manufacturer. Therefore, it quickly launched 2 types of electric vehicles to gauge market reaction. If they had secured Samsung SB, they would have moved forward with mass production of electric vehicles. However, Im Jin-young retained Samsung SB and partnered with Karos. From Unsung Motors' perspective, it was a situation that required reworking its future vehicle strategy. Han Chan-young looked around at the executives and said, "From now on, Unsung Motors will focus its investment on hydrogen vehicles." The conference room buzzed with excitement at those words. After one failure to pull out the card of hydrogen car development now was quite surprising. After all, electric vehicles are merely a transitional product that emerged on the road to next-generation automobiles. No matter how much they've improved, range and charging time remain issues. As long as these fundamental problems are not solved, hydrogen vehicles have every opportunity. Therefore, other automakers turning to electric vehicles have not completely halted their technology development for hydrogen cars. There are many overlapping aspects since both rely on electricity to power motors. Kang Min-cheol, the CEO of Unsung MBS, spoke cautiously. It's true that hydrogen cars are superior to electric vehicles in many ways, but currently the charging infrastructure is severely lacking. There are only 12 hydrogen charging stations in South Korea. How can one drive a car that cannot charge its fuel? You don't need to worry about that. The government plans to designate hydrogen cars as a future growth engine and actively support them soon. This includes increasing subsidies for hydrogen cars, building hydrogen charging stations directly, and providing installation support funds to the private sector. Since Unsung Motors began developing electric vehicles, the government has actively supported them. To be precise, subsidies have been focused on Unsung Motors by imposing limits on vehicle prices and battery capacity. But now, are they going to support hydrogen cars again? Everyone gathered here knew about the relationship between Unsung Motors and the government. Regardless of whether it's electric or hydrogen vehicles, sales are impossible without subsidies. If the government backs it properly, it's worth a shot. Han Chanyoung smiled. Hydrogen cars are the ultimate eco-friendly vehicles. The future lies with hydrogen cars. We started investigating PS. In Korea, it's obvious that we would notice any movements. So we discreetly commissioned the Golden Gate Asia branch. First, we plan to closely examine the flow of funds. To prepare for any unforeseen situations, we strengthened security around the building and homes. We also kept a close eye on the movements within the political arena and Unsung Motors. I received a call from Chairman Im Jin-young. The government is set to promote hydrogen cars. Soon, the president will announce a support plan for hydrogen vehicles. This surprised me. Could they really take out the hydrogen car card? In Korea, there was only one company capable of launching hydrogen cars. This clearly indicates support for Unsung Motors. After failing to absorb Samsung SB as a subsidiary and falling behind an electric vehicle, are winking and laughing, were they thinking about gaining the upper hand with hydrogen cars? Unsung Motors is recognized for its technological prowess in hydrogen cars, even surpassing Toyota and Honda. Moreover, as the only complete vehicle manufacturer with a mass production system, they likely found it hard to ignore. When it comes to politicians, one must understand the context well. Budgets don't just appear out of nowhere. They are limited by purpose and usage. Increasing subsidies for hydrogen cars and expanding hydrogen charging stations essentially means decreasing subsidies for electric vehicles and electric charging stations. Thank you for the heads up. Then I'll take my leave. After hanging up, I pondered. Unlike the fledgling OTK company, the Samsung Group has deeply rooted itself in Korean society for a long time. They must have quite a few people planted within the political sphere. That's how they could gather this information in advance. It's convenient to befriend the Samsung Group. A few days later, as Chairman Im Jin-young mentioned, President Park Si-hyung took the stage at an economic policy meeting, declaring renewable energy, robotics, content, the Internet of Things, big data and hydrogen cars as future growth engines. The focus was heavily on hydrogen vehicles with a step-by-step roadmap presented. Hydrogen cars, dubbed the ultimate eco-friendly vehicle. Local governments are directly installing hydrogen charging stations. Plans to triple the number of hydrogen charging stations by the end of this year. Expansion of hydrogen vehicle subsidies. Amid the influx of news, Unsung Motors announced its plans to launch 2 types of hydrogen vehicles, seemingly waiting for the right moment. Take, you asked, are hydrogen cars run by hydrogen? That's right. There are 2 types of hydrogen vehicles. Hydrogen internal combustion engine vehicles that use hydrogen to power the engine and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, SEVs, that generate electricity from hydrogen to drive the motor. In reality, the former has seen little development, so when people refer to hydrogen cars, they typically mean the latter. Isn't that basically the same as electric cars? The difference is between a secondary battery and a fuel cell. Electric vehicles, EVs, store electricity in a battery, while hydrogen vehicles, SEVs, produce electricity directly by reacting hydrogen with oxygen. One carries a charged battery while the other carries a mini power generator. What about the price? Hydrogen vehicles are much more expensive. Instead of a battery, hydrogen vehicles are equipped with hydrogen fuel tanks and fuel cell stacks, the devices that generate electricity. Currently, the price of the fuel cell stack is higher than that of batteries. Is that why they failed? That's part of it, but the biggest issue was the lack of charging stations. Initially, the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging was similarly lacking. However, electricity can be installed more easily. You just need to run wires and set up a charger. If needed, charging from a household outlet is also an option. The electric vehicle charging stations have been set up everywhere. At highway rest areas, government offices, apartments, large buildings, and supermarket or shopping mall parking lots. But there are only 12 hydrogen charging stations. They can just build more. It's ridiculously expensive. How much? At least 3 billion won. Taekyu was taken aback. Is it really that much? This is just the pure installation cost. The land price is separate. To build one in Seoul, you'd need at least 5 billion won. Regardless of the cost, if there are enough users, it's worth the investment. But how many hydrogen cars are there to justify such investment? It's a chicken and egg problem. There are no hydrogen cars because there are no hydrogen charging stations, and there are no hydrogen charging stations because there are no hydrogen cars. That's why the government plans to subsidize the construction of charging stations first, then increase the number of hydrogen cars. In fact, looking solely at South Korea, the hydrogen vehicle promotion policy isn't entirely misguided. South Korea's land is small, and its population density is among the highest in the world. Furthermore, 40% of the population resides in the metropolitan area. Just setting up a few charging stations in the metropolitan center and local municipalities would resolve some issues. Unsung Motors hasn't made a mistake, it's just that there's no one behind them in line. In new industries, economies of scale are crucial. Both electric and hydrogen vehicles have their issues. If lithium-ion battery prices hadn't dropped significantly, hydrogen cars might have gained a competitive edge in pricing. Then multiple companies would have entered research, development, and mass production of hydrogen vehicles, creating a virtuous cycle of lowering costs and expanding charging infrastructure. Isn't the trend already leaning toward electric vehicles? That's true, but now, support from the government is likely to leave hydrogen cars limited to the domestic market. However, shortly after, surprising news emerged. Toyota, Audi, BMW, and others have formed patent partnerships with Unsung Motors and simultaneously announced their plans for hydrogen vehicle development. Hydrogen cars are, in a way, like a dilemma. While there's nothing to eat, it feels wasteful to discard it. Compared to electric vehicles, which are relatively easier to develop, hydrogen cars require enormous research and development costs for fuel storage tanks and fuel cell stacks, making it difficult to establish mass production systems. This creates a barrier to entry, favoring established automakers with ample funds and production lines. Unsung Motors threw out patents and technology partnerships as bait to create economies of scale, drawing in automakers. Even without Unsung's proposal, companies like Toyota, Audi, BMW, and Honda were already researching hydrogen cars independently. Among them, Toyota launched the Mirai, while several others unveiled concept cars at motor shows. There's also a consideration that rather than trailing behind in the electric vehicle market led by new entrants like Tesla and BYD, they might want to change the game. The reason established automakers can't let go of hydrogen cars, even with electric vehicles becoming the norm, is simple. They lack certainty about whether electric vehicles are wholly the next generation cars or if hydrogen will take over. All problems with electric cars begin and end with batteries. In recent years, IT technology has progressed remarkably. However, battery technology hasn't kept pace. The advancement has mostly been in packing more capacity into the same volume and lowering costs through mass production and process improvements, which is a significant achievement in itself. Hydrogen cars also face issues such as charging station installation, the safety of fuel storage tanks, and the cost of fuel cell stacks, but these can be addressed. It's been proven that fuel storage tanks do not explode in traffic accidents, and building charging stations is straightforward. The cost of fuel cell stacks can also be reduced significantly once mass production systems are established. They have already decreased compared to the initial stages. I closed the material I'd been reading, which contained Golden Gate's internal analysis of the next-generation automotive market outlook. Take You asked, will the hydrogen car era really open? I relayed the content from the materials. If hydrogen cars become price competitive while electric vehicles don't resolve their battery issues, it's possible. Since both electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles are reliant on government subsidies, if government support focuses on hydrogen cars, they could surprisingly see rapid growth in a short period. In our country, the president offers support, but other countries won't do that, right? Here's a question. Which does the government prefer more, electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles? Electric vehicles? Wrong. The answer is hydrogen vehicles. Why? Because it's easier to collect taxes. Fuel taxes account for a significant portion of tax revenue. The reason the government has been indecisive about eco-friendly vehicles, despite being aware of the trend, is largely due to the realistic issue of declining tax revenue. Electric vehicles are widely used in homes and industries, making it challenging to impose taxes specifically on automotive use. However, like gasoline and diesel, it is straightforward to impose taxes on hydrogen based on capacity. When the day comes that internal combustion engine cars are completely replaced by hydrogen vehicles, could we expect hydrogen to be taxed as much as gasoline? If hydrogen cars succeed in Korea with government support, other countries might consider a similar approach. Indeed, many countries including Japan, China, Germany, and France are keen to foster hydrogen vehicles. Japan has already established over 100 hydrogen charging stations with government leadership, and other countries are also accelerating infrastructure development. The reason electric vehicles gain momentum is that battery prices have decreased, and their range and charging times have significantly improved. If the construction of hydrogen vehicle infrastructure and the decline in fuel cell stack prices surpass the advancements in batteries, it wouldn't be impossible for the situation to reverse. Ultimately, the issue lies with batteries. As I muttered, the surroundings suddenly became hazy and something floated before my eyes. Next generation battery? Nobel Prize in chemistry? Why is this suddenly coming up? As I regained my senses, the hologram had vanished. Instead, I saw Taikyu's face. What did you see? I murmured absent-mindedly. The future of electric vehicles. Huh. When I explained what I had just seen, Taikyu looked puzzled. What does that mean? I pondered for a moment. Oracle wouldn't give me pointless information. Maybe this is the key to solving the electric vehicle battery issue. Taikyu nodded. Oh, that could actually be true. So what do we do now? First, we need to find Professor Kim Haman. That's a very common name. There are probably hundreds of Kim Hamans across the country. He's a professor. How many professors could possibly have the name Kim Haman? Still, there must be a few. For battery development, he'd likely be in a science and engineering field. Kim Haman, professor, battery-related field. Those three criteria alone are enough to pinpoint him. Without needing to conduct a separate search, I decided to check a portal site. 3 names appeared in the profile section. A professor of philosophy, a professor of practical music, and finally, Professor Kim Haman from the Department of Chemistry at Korea University. Is he a professor at our school? After lunch, I went outside to the break room with Taikyu and Senior Sanjiop. It gets chilly. When will this weather finally warm up? Asked Taikyu. How's the esports team formation going? We're looking for a training facility and dormitory, and I'm coordinating with the PR team leader to recruit players. Surprisingly, the salaries aren't that high. You'd think being a professional gamer would come with immense wealth and fame, but in reality, very few players earn over 100 million won. Earning a salary comparable to a corporate employee is already quite good, and most players don't even make that. From a corporate standpoint, esports isn't as widespread as baseball or football, and it's challenging to generate significant revenue, making it hard to offer high salaries. Recently, there's a trend of famous pro gamers transferring to China. The power of Chinese capital is truly terrifying, offering 2 to 3 times the salary without hesitation. This is also due to the growth of the Chinese esports market, which is on another level compared to ours. Taikyu lamented. It's sad that national talents are leaking out due to inadequate corporate support. What talent leakage are you talking about? It's natural for professionals to move to places that pay well. If they can promote our country's name abroad through gaming, that's a good thing. Senior Sanjiop inserted coins and grabbed coffee from the vending machine, handing it to us. Have you been getting many matchmaking requests lately? In response to my question, Sanjiop sighed. Why wouldn't I? I may not get direct contact since I changed my number, but requests are pouring in through my parents. Daughters of lawmakers, professors, small business owners, entertainers, judges, lawyers, and so on. I chuckled. Why don't you meet some of them? There are quite a few people asking to be introduced. Want to try going on a blind date? Sean Yeep said as he sipped his coffee. Have you heard? The cryptocurrency market is going insane these days. Bitcoin is likely to hit $3,000 soon. I was somewhat shocked by that statement. Wasn't it $2,000 just a few days ago? It jumped 30% in just those few days. Taikyu showed interest. Didn't we sell it when it was around $1,000? It was about $1,100. Even then, I thought that price was ridiculous. But to hear it has more than doubled is shocking. If I had just held on to it in my digital wallet instead of selling, it could have been worth $30 billion. What about Ethereum? That's over $300 now. This time I was really surprised. Really? Currently, Bitcoin is ranked first by market cap and Ethereum is second. There are also altcoins like Luffle, Loida, Stelmenta, Boatcoin, and Paydex, among others. The new altcoins entering the market are showing incredible momentum, surpassing even Bitcoin. And Company K is continuously mining not just Bitcoin, but various altcoins at their mining facilities in China and Iceland. How much do all the coins add up to in market cap? Probably around $100 billion. At this rate, it might catch up to Samsung Electronics market cap. Thanks to the rising trend of Bitcoin, cryptocurrency exchanges are also experiencing significant growth. Until last year, Bitcoin struggled to generate profit, but this year trading volume and amounts have skyrocketed, leading to joyful exclamations. Recently, our server crashed, so we had to expand our server capacity and increase staff. We even rented a building in Gangnam to set up a customer service center and offline exchange. It sounds like a stock exchange. It's quite similar. There's a digital display showing coin prices and buy-sell orders. The difference is whether you're buying stocks or coins. Sang Yip, my senior, asked me, excluding Bitcoin shares, the value of the coins I hold has already surpassed $2.5 billion. How much farther do you think this will go? Well, what do you think? In my opinion, it might be time to sell soon. The bubble seems likely to burst. Despite blockchain technology, its true value is still unclear to us. It feels somewhat reminiscent of the tulip bubble, doesn't it? Tegu chimed in, pretending to know. You mean the tulip price spike in the Netherlands? They say that a 3-year-old pup can recite poetry. It seems he knows a fair bit about economic history now. I added some context. Not all tulips increased in price. Specifically, the rare bulb varieties skyrocketed. Tulips can mutate during breeding, creating rare colors. Suddenly, as people began to ascribe value to these rare bulbs, prices soared. In the end, the bubble burst, resulting in a massive crash. The rise of a new technology like blockchain does resemble the dot-com bubble. Bubbles don't just appear. Several conditions must be met. First, there should be ample liquidity. Second, the investment must be scarce. And third, there must be a belief that prices will continue to rise. Adding a new technology or product that hasn't existed before enhances the situation. True, back then people invested without even knowing what the internet was. The dot-com bubble eventually crossed over to Korea and became the Kosdaq bubble. At that time, something outrageous happened. IT companies skyrocketed and even unrelated companies soared just because their names sounded IT-like. Later on, simply being listed on Kosdaq meant their stock prices went up. The well-known Serum technology even surpassed the market capitalization of Unsung Motors at one point. All of this was due to the illusions surrounding the new technology of the internet. In the end, it all crashed spectacularly, marking a grand finale. After my explanation, Taekyu asked, "What kind of madness is that?" When the world is insane, the madmen become the norm and the sane people appear insane. During that time, fund managers and analysts shouting that Kosdaq was a bubble and that people shouldn't invest were treated like lunatics. Every morning, stock prices rose. Investing seemed normal while staying out seemed odd. The current situation with cryptocurrencies is similar. People dive into the market, not knowing what blockchain is or what value it holds, simply because they can make money by investing. Senior Sang Yip said, "Seeing how much it's risen in a few months, isn't it really a bubble? It only becomes a bubble when it bursts. One of the frightening aspects of a bubble is that you can't tell it's a bubble until it bursts. Maybe it's time to start selling?" Rationally, it seems right to realize profits by now. An unexpected rise one day suggests it could suddenly drop just as quickly. Yet for some reason I feel like I shouldn't sell right now. A normal person would trust rationality, but in my case trusting my intuition seems wiser, right? Let's hold for now. No more buying, just keep watching while we mine. Senior Sang Yip nodded without asking for a reason. Got it. Taekyu said, "What if, in a few years, Bitcoin hits $20,000? At those words, Senior Sang Yip burst into laughter. Haha, that's a bit much. Well, it used to be less than $1 anyway. In any case, there was no incoming money after Brexit and the US elections. Only money was going out. Thankfully, cryptocurrencies have been rising steadily. It's not real money until we sell and recover it, though." I crumpled the empty paper cup and tossed it into the trash can while muttering, "Is there anywhere money might come out from? Why wouldn't there be?" Huh. Taekyu confidently replied, "The launch of Lost Fantasy M is the day after tomorrow." The launch of Lost Fantasy M faced many ups and downs. Due to conflicts with management, development was on the verge of cancellation. When OTK Company decided to invest in development costs, Ichikawa Shigeru left Linux Pentagon with the development team. With the 1 billion yen investment, he established OTK Games and began independently developing Lost Fantasy M. Being the developer of the Lost Fantasy series and a former representative of Pentagon, he held the production rights. An additional 400 million yen was later invested, and costs rose further with his direct publishing efforts. The total investment amount was 18 billion won. The one who insisted on making the investment decision was O Take-Yu. He believed that whether it succeeded or failed, Lost Fantasy series, made directly by Ichikawa Shigeru, had to be released. Take-Yu was confident in its success. I've played most games out there, but this is something else. Isn't it just because you like Lost Fantasy? No. I played it during beta service and it's going to be a huge hit. Senior Sang Yip remarked. The internet reaction seems pretty lukewarm. Don't worry about it. A game destined to succeed will succeed. While there were many die-hard fans due to the series' history, it's tough to turn a profit with just a niche group. It's uncertain how many console gamers would switch to mobile. I chuckled and said, even if it's a success, how much money could it possibly make? If it at least breaks even on development costs, that would be fortunate. I'm telling you, it's going to be a real hit. I nodded nonchalantly. Sure. If it does well, that's great. It's just money spent on a hobby, so let's not be stingy about it. Take-Yu protested. What do you know about games? The condition Take-Yu set for his investment was very simple. A simultaneous release in Korea and Japan. He didn't touch on anything else. This is the first time the Lost Fantasy series will be released as a mobile game, rather than on consoles or PC. The internet is filled with mostly negative opinions. Who would play a game that's already lost its charm? It's not a casual game. Making an MMORPG for mobile is a mistake from the start. The release is too late. If it had launched last year, it would have been different, but recently big titles are flooding the market. Looking at the system, it doesn't seem different from other games at all. Let's be honest, even Shigeru seems to have lost his edge. If this flops, he might consider retirement. While this negativity from Korean gamers is expected, there were additional reasons for the negative reactions from Japanese gamers. OTK Company was temporarily misunderstood as a Japanese company due to its name. Japanese people cheered for a company that had achieved significant results in the global financial market, believing it to be Japanese. However, when it was revealed that the CEO is Korean, they seemed to feel a sense of betrayal. The parent company of OTK Games, OTK Company, was behind the attack on the Japanese foreign exchange market during Brexit, causing major damage. Who would play a game invested in by a Korean? Just go bankrupt and withdraw from the Japanese market. Koreans should get out of Japan. Get lost, traitorous company. In contrast, Lost Fantasy fans expressed positive opinions. Ichikawa Shigeru stated in a media interview that OTK Company's investment was driven by pure fan sentiments rather than profit, allowing them to develop happily without any interference. Was it not an investment but just otaku passion? A successful example of an otaku. Indeed, it's Otaku Company. If it weren't for OTK Company, Lost Fantasy M wouldn't have even been released. If only I had more money, I would love to support the production of the anime I want to see. Ichikawa Shigeru was confident in their success. Lost Fantasy M is the highest quality game in the Lost Fantasy series to date. Those who played the original Lost Fantasy will feel nostalgia, while newcomers will experience something fresh. Amidst anticipation and concerns, the official release date approached. It was launched through various app stores and, like most mobile games, it adopted an in-app purchase system. The game itself is free, but players can buy items within the game. So what were the results? Lost Fantasy M launched simultaneously in Korea and Japan. Japan's first-day user count, 5.8 million, revenue, 3 billion yen. Korea's first-day downloads, 2.5 million. Revenue, 12 billion won. Lost Fantasy M sees explosive success. A new horizon for mobile games has been revealed. As soon as it launched, the number of concurrent users exceeded 100,000, causing the servers to crash. An emergency inspection was conducted and they barely managed to recover by morning, but access and waiting users continued to surge. We were taken aback by the completely unexpected success. It was beyond what could be described as a hit. It already surpassed the traditional mobile game powerhouse, Emperor of World, to claim the top spot in both countries' app stores. Just how much revenue had it generated? With the first day's revenue alone, they could recover the development costs. Only Taikyu, who had predicted this situation, burst into laughter. Ahaha. What did I tell you? They had invested without any expectation, only to hit this massive jackpot. The gaming industry is a goose that lays golden eggs. It's difficult to achieve success, but once you do, it consistently generates revenue. A hit like this only happens once every few years, if that. By now, Linux Pentagon must be regretting their decisions. Did you really expect this level of success? At my question, Taikyu gave a sly smile. It's Shigeru. Trends may be temporary, but class is eternal. Is this guy just lucky, or does he have a good intuition? When Lost Fantasy M became a huge hit, other development companies hurriedly began creating similar mobile games. The media pointed out the excessive focus on in-game purchases and gambling-like content. In fact, there were already posts claiming that people had spent millions on it. The Lost Fantasy series succeeded in Korea, the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Given the current situation, it seemed inevitable that it would also be a hit in other countries. OTK Games' 100% stake is held by OTK Company, with 12% allocated to stock options for the executives. If the game had failed, they wouldn't have exercised those options, but with the success, things changed. Naturally, Ichikawa and Shigeru, among the developers, exercised all their stock options and secured that 12% stake. On a roll, Ichikawa and Shigeru announced they would create Lost Fantasy Online. Since they could cover development costs with current revenues, there was no reason to stop them. Amid the continued success of Lost Fantasy, I sought out a paper written by Professor Kim Ho-min. He had published about 100 papers, including co-authored works. I printed and read his most recent paper published in a foreign journal. Since a translation wasn't available yet, it was in English. The aluminum substrate forming the anode active materials, composed of anode and cathode materials and a separator. NCM battery. What the heck does this mean? The numbers and symbols were intricately tangled with dozens of unfamiliar terms. Even though they were all recognizable words, I couldn't grasp the meaning. I'm glad I didn't choose a science path. I leaned back in my chair and muttered, Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Korea's IT technology is world-class. However, while a former president received the Nobel Peace Prize, there has yet to be a single recipient in the field of science. The reason is that Korea has neglected basic science. In contrast, developed countries like the US, Japan, and the UK invest heavily in fundamental research. Korea does invest, but both the government and corporations expect significant results within 1 or 2 years. Given this situation, proper research in basic science is unlikely. What kind of battery did they develop? According to what I've seen in my prediction, Professor Kim Ho-min will be the first person in our country to receive a Nobel Prize in the field of science. However, with limited information, it's unclear when he will win the Nobel Prize. Could be as soon as next year, or it might be several decades from now. In any case, since he holds the key to next-generation batteries, it's essential that I meet him in person. I wondered if any of the employees knew Professor Kim Ho-min. I wasn't very hopeful, but surprisingly, one employee was a graduate of Korea University's chemistry department. His name is Park Kwang-hyun. After graduating from university, he completed the CFO program and worked at a fund company before transferring to our company. I called him to the CEO's office. A moment later, a man in his mid-30s entered. He had a plump build and a friendly demeanor. Hello, CEO. I'm Park Kwang-hyun. He looked puzzled about why he was called in. I heard you graduated from the Korea University Chemistry Department. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. He is several years my senior. I got straight to the point. Do you happen to know Professor Kim Ho-min? Kim Ho-min. That professor. Do you remember him? Of course. What is he like? He typically teaches only one subject per semester and mostly stays in his lab. He seems a bit eccentric, but he's a good person. His skills are beyond question. Korea University has various research facilities on campus. The university provides direct support, and large corporations or foundations also fund research. Are there any other notable things about him? He paused for a moment, deep in thought, then recalled something. Ah. He might be quite close with the head of the business department. Really? So he was friends with our department head? This makes things a bit easier. Park Kwang-hyun cautiously asked. But what's this about? I couldn't exactly say it was because he was expected to win a Nobel Prize for developing next-generation batteries. So I gave a vague response instead. Well, our company is investing in batteries along with Seosung SB. Professor Kim Ho-min is an authority in that field, so I thought I'd ask him something. Oh, I see. After the conversation ended, he said goodbye and left. I immediately called the department head. Hello. Hello, Professor. This is your student Kong Jin-hoo. I drove to the university. It's been a while since I went to school. Is this the first time since finishing the first semester last year? So much has happened since then. Upon arriving, I parked and headed to the department office. As I entered, Professor Kim Young-jun stood up and welcomed me. Who is this? Is that Kong Jin-hoo from OTK Company? It's been a while, Professor. How have you been? Very well. Please have a seat. As I sat down, Professor Kim Young-jun smiled at me. You've done a great job of hiding all this time. I smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry. I never thought that the investor who cashed in on the forex market during Brexit would be my student. Do you know the whole school was in an uproar when the press conference happened? I heard about it. I got the news from Yuri. Have you thought about returning to school? Right now, I'm a bit busy with work, so I'll think about it slowly later. Professor Kim Young-jun said with a hint of exaggeration. I wonder if I have anything to teach the CEO managing a large corporation. There's still so much to learn. The work is all handled by the people around me. Managing people well is the foundation of management. You're doing it just as you learned. All thanks to you, Professor. I gradually brought up the topic. By the way, how did it go with the request I made? Professor Kim Young-jun nodded. I've mentioned it, so you can just visit the lab. Thank you. Oh. Before you go, sign something for me. I'll hang it up next to the Southwell sign and brag about it. The science and engineering buildings were located deep inside the campus. I entered the research lab next to the College of Natural Sciences. To go up to a different floor, I needed a visitor's badge. I spoke to the staff at the desk. I have an appointment with Professor Kim Ho-min. What is your name? My name is Kong Jin-hoo. The staff looked at my face in surprise. Then he handed me a visitor's badge. You can go to room 705 on the 7th floor. Thank you. I took the elevator up and knocked on the door of room 705. There was no response and the door was slightly ajar. Excuse me. I cautiously stepped inside. It looked like a personal library. The interior was filled with books and a large blackboard hung on one side. The blackboard was densely covered with numbers and symbols. It looked as if it hadn't been written all at once. The slant and size of the handwriting varied, resembling scribbles. At that moment, a voice came from behind me. Do you understand what it says? I turned to see a man in his early 40s wearing glasses. Professor Kim Ho-min? He nodded. With disheveled hair, a gown stained with kimchi juice and blue Crocs, he looked less like a professor and more like a bum. The future Nobel Prize winner in chemistry appeared more like an unemployed person than an esteemed academic.